So I'm going to pray, and then Andrew will come up and lead us in a song, and then we'll go off to classes. Lord God, we praise you and thank you just for your goodness, your mercy toward us. We thank you for this ministry that you developed out of a time where the churches were closing and retreating. We had the burden to gather more and to glorify you in the physical assembly and the growing grace and knowledge of Christ. And so as you have developed this ministry, we pray that you are fine-tuning us, that you are refining us to live more according to your word, your standard for all of life. And so we praise you in this great time for our church. May you be glorified in all that we do. We pray this in the Lord Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, we are going to do some singing, and not always from the Psalter, but many times it will be. I've tried to select some songs that I thought that would be appropriate to the kind of theme of the month, so God willing, the plan is kind of to do one song every month for consecutive weeks so that you learn it. And so the first one we're going to do is Psalm 5. And Psalm 5, the theme today is ethics, Christian ethics, that Dennis will be teaching. And so we have to understand, if we understand what is right and wrong according to God, we need to understand his character. And so Psalm 5 speaks of the holiness of God and what he believes or what he knows about righteousness and evil and those who practice each. And so let's stand up as we worship the Lord together. I'm just going to do this a cappella, and this is a minor tune that you probably have heard before. Listen to my words, O Lord, know the whispered things I say, heed my crying out for help, God my King, to you I pray, hear me in the morning, Lord, when I lift my voice on high, setting forth my plea to you, looking out with watchful eye. For I know that you, O God, find in evil no delight. Evil cannot dwell with you, nor the proud stand in your sight. You hate all who practice sin. You destroy the one who lies. For the Lord abominates those whose schemes of blood devise. Yet in your abounding love, to your house will I draw near, bowing to your holy place, worshiping in reverent fear, since, O Lord, my enemies all around me lie in wait. Lead me in your righteousness, make your way before me straight. In their mouth there is no truth, all their heart destruction seeks. Like an open grave their throat, while their tongue with honey speaks. Make them bear their guilt, O God, snare them in the things they planned, cast them out for all their sins, rebels who against you stand. Yet let all who trust in you sing for joy through all their days. Guard all those who love your name. Let them give you joyful praise. Blessing to the righteous one. You, O Lord, Please have a seat.
If the kids' class, you guys can take them off to the kids' class. That's your duty.
Okay, we good? We're good? All right, awesome. All right, well, welcome everyone. It is good to see everyone for our first Institute lecture. I have the lucky privilege of starting us out in March on a great, easy topic of ethics. So let me just start by saying that the study of ethics is multifaceted. And the reason why it's multifaceted is because on the one hand, it's extremely easy, especially as Christians. Well, it's really easy no matter where you are. No matter where you are in terms of your kind of perspective on life. And it's easy because as Christians, we would just say, well, look at the Bible. If God said it, it's right. If he said it's wrong, it's wrong. Pretty straightforward. I agree. But it's complex because it is filled with difficulties. Because we live in a world that has many complicated situations. And it is, I would argue, it's only getting more and more complicated. Now, that's not to say that there's, something phenomenally new under the sun that nobody's ever heard of, and, we don't know how we're going to figure it out. No, the biblical principles speak to every issue of life, but we live at a time where things are becoming more complicated. So one example would be in ethics, for example, in medicine. Prior to the modern medical world, the modern medical phenomena in existence, you really didn't have to wrestle a whole lot with what you're going to do with a person who is sick. When is a person considered dead? When are they alive? We live at a time where you could literally hook up an individual to a machine, and that machine can keep that person alive almost indefinitely. So from an ethical perspective, that's very difficult to wrestle through. Our forefathers, let's say the reformers, Martin Luther, John Calvin, they didn't have to wrestle with that. Even though the death rate was great back then, they didn't have to wrestle with those issues. So there's a complicated and a difficult issue of ethics, and that's why it's very important to study this. Also, ethics can be very challenging because we all have an ethic in life. All of us are operating upon some form of ethic. We have all been making decisions ever since we were born. Most of the time, we learn how to make decisions based on what we observe. Our parents, how they did it, our family members, our church, our society, our culture. We all have a specific ethic. So when you embark in a study of ethics, it can be challenging because you could hear certain things and you can be like, wow, well, that's not how I did it. So now you're wrestling with it from a personal perspective. You're trying to understand, comparing what you did to what is being presented, if you're going to agree that it's true, obviously. So the study of ethics is very important because we are all operating in a world in which we are making moral decisions. So let's start. So I'm actually not going to see the screen. I was actually thinking I would see the screen, but I didn't think about that. So I'll kind of look back. But let me in the beginning just throw out 4 resources that I found helpful. Now, ethics is a massive study, and there's an endless amount of books from all perspectives, secular, Christian, and everything in between. So just these are a couple books that I found helpful, and I have 2 of them here I'll show you. The first one is Ethics for a Brave New World, written by the Feinbergs, Paul and John Feinberg. They're Christian theologians, Christian ethicists. So they wrote a book dealing, just a generic book on ethics, dealing with foundation of ethics and then also dealing with specific issue of ethics. Now, all of these books, they're going to be kind of bigger books because the issue of ethics obviously is covering a very wide spectrum of life. So don't let that scare you from it, because a lot of these books, they're really just reference books. It's not a book you're just going to get and read from beginning to finish, necessarily. Unless you're an overachiever, and that's great. The other one is Wayne Grudem. He wrote a massive volume on Christian ethics. I do have that one if any of you are interested. Nice, light read. But he is covering kind of the whole broad spectrum of ethics. So I'll have this here if anyone's interested in just kind of looking at it, seeing how complicated some of these issues can be. You can look at that. The other one is John Frame. He's a modern, he's still alive, he's retired, but a modern, great Reformed theologian. He wrote an insane amount of books. But his big thing was just the Lordship of Christ. So he takes the concept of the Lordship of Christ and applies it to ethics in the doctrine of the Christian life. And then the last one I'll throw out is Theonomy and Christian Ethics by Greg Bonson. Also a nice little light read. But this one will be addressing the issue of ethics not in terms of specific issues that we interact with in life. This is really more going to lay the foundation on how to think about ethics, how to approach ethics from a theonomic perspective. So I'll have that too if anyone is interested in perusing at those books. So those are some resources that I've used just over the years, reading, prepping for this class, and that I found very helpful. Let me do a quick outline. So we have 4 lessons. Lesson 1 today, we're going to do the foundation of ethics. Now, really the whole class, all 4 lessons are going to be just on the foundation of ethics. We're not necessarily going to get into specific issues. We don't have the time to get into specific issues. So what I wanted to focus more on is just let's step back and let's think about how do we make moral decisions. What should guide us? What are some things that we should think about as we approach moral decision making? So today, we're kind of digging in deep, just more on the laying out on the certain aspects, certain topics, certain issues in the study of ethics that are important to keep in mind. But really, all 4 classes are just kind of laying the foundation of ethics. Next time we'll focus on the source of ethics. So where do we go to get our ethics? Where do we go to get our morality? Everyone's going somewhere, right? You're obviously, we're making moral decisions every day. You're going somewhere. So how do we think through that? Lesson 3, we're going to look at the knowledge of God's will, and that one will probably be the most practical. We're going to just think through, as Christians, how do we approach decision making? How do we approach just knowing God's will in general? And again, all of these are massive topics. You can spend weeks and weeks trying to review them, but we're going to just kind of do a big picture approach, try to lay as much of the foundation as we can. And then lesson 4, I wanted to do a specific issue and get into kind of applying that, but I'm thinking of maybe next year. I'll just throw that out there. I haven't talked to Matt yet, so I'll just throw it out there. Maybe next year we'll do kind of a sequel to this class and just really look at issues of Christian ethics, where we're just going to pick specific issues and just try to apply a biblical ethic to that. So we'll end with looking at the goal of ethics and the blessings of obedience. And I think that one will be very helpful too, because ethics is not just some esoteric study that we do in the classroom. No, this is directly relevant to our moral decision making and is directly relevant to who we are as Christians and our standing before God and our everyday approach with living a Christian life. How does God bless us? He blesses us when we obey Him, when we walk in light of His commandments. So we'll dig into some of those issues. Did we just freeze? There we go. Okay. So let's start with the foundation of ethics. Would you mind if I turn this? How much would that mess it up? Because I completely didn't think about it, that I was kind of going to view that. Would that mess up the camera too much or no? I don't want to be just looking back every single time. Okay. All right, so the foundation of ethics, we're going to start with that, and we'll start by looking at some theological presuppositions. Now, ethics and theology are linked together. So one passage that's very interesting you can turn to is Hebrews chapter 5. Right towards the end there of Hebrews chapter 5. We'll look at verses 11 and 14. Therefore, let us be diligent to enter that rest. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in 4. There we go. Concerning him, we have much to say. So this is concerning Jesus being the priest, the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. He kind of, the writer of Hebrews, it almost seems like he jumps to that discussion, and then he says, wait, are you really ready for that discussion? Concerning him we have much to say, and it is hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you have need again for someone to teach you in the elementary principles of the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he is an infant. Okay, so he's talking about this whole idea of, he's in the midst of doctrine, theology, teaching, learning Christology, learning who Christ is, what Christ has done, why he did it. And then he says, and then he pauses, and he almost kind of just challenges the Christians there, and he ties their learning of theology to their walk. And look at where he ends. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern both good and evil. And that is where ethics comes in. Ethics is the whole study, the whole idea of learning how to discern good and evil. And that's tied directly there to the whole idea of our theology. So theology and ethics go hand in hand in terms of, as we learn and grow theology, who God is and how he has revealed himself and what he has revealed, that will directly impact how we walk before him. Because we will be more equipped to discern good and evil in this world, to discern morality in this world. So a couple, obviously this list can be much greater and much bigger, but a couple of theological presuppositions that are important here. One is the existence of God. So obviously your approach and understanding of the existence of God is going to impact ethics. I don't think anyone's blown away by that, right? If you don't believe God exists, first of all, you wouldn't be here. And second of all, I don't think you would really care, what morals are. Second of all, sovereignty of God. Now this one gets more important because your view on the sovereignty of God and his rule in this world will also directly impact your view of morality. It might not on the surface, but once you start digging into things, and applying just the whole concept of the sovereignty of God to everyday life in everything, whether it be personal struggles or disasters, or whether it be just worldly natural struggles or disasters. And there's a lot there that your view of sovereignty of God will impact how you think through morality and how morality plays out in this world. Thirdly, the lordship of Christ. That's obviously a big one. That's tied directly to the sovereignty of God. But is Christ Lord, and what does that mean? Is he Lord over our morality? Is he Lord over our everyday decisions? Is he Lord over the moral decisions that we have to make in life? Next one is the sinfulness of man. So obviously, your view on how sinful man is will affect your ethics and will affect your morality. It will affect it more so in the area of where morality kind of comes from and the ability of man to function in light of that morality. If you believe that man is not totally corrupt and there is a sense of good in man, then your view of morality stemming from this world will be much higher. What do I mean by that? Natural theology. We'll touch on that a little bit. So you're going to view that the mind and reason and natural theology is going to play a much bigger role in where morality stems from and the foundation of morality. So that's really big in Roman Catholicism. In Thomas Aquinas, it's all about the reason and natural theology. I mean, they go as far as to say that you don't even need revelation per se, because from the natural order of things, you can get morality. So again, sinfulness of man will affect that. And then the last one I'll mention is Old Testament ethics. Again, Bonson's book, Theonomy and Christian Ethics. So your view of how the Old Testament applies will affect ethics. And it will affect morality. It will affect how you carry over Old Testament commands. We're all going to universally, generally agree that the Ten Commandments apply. The question is, why do they apply? To what extent do they apply? Do they all apply? And your view on Old Testament ethics, the relationship of Old and New Testament, continuity, discontinuity, all those kind of things, some of them which we talked about last year in the covenant theology class, all of that will be relevant to ethics. All right, so let's begin with a few important definitions. The first one is ethics. So what are we talking about? I like John Frame's definition in his book. Ethics is theology viewed as a means of determining which person's acts and attitudes receive God's blessing and which do not. So there's a couple things that he does in that definition that is unique, I think, especially for Reformed Christians, and that is he again links ethics with theology. Ethics is not something that's disconnected from who God is and what God is doing. Now, obviously, if you're approaching ethics from a secular perspective, then you're going to disagree with that. But we are not doing that. We are obviously, as Christians, as the people of God, we approach everything in life, including moral decisions, including ethics, from the perspective of theology and who God is and what he has said. So he links those together. He makes ethics inherently Christian. Now, especially as Reformed Christians, and I'll throw out some terms, maybe not all of you will be familiar with it, but as presuppositional Reformed Christians, we would say that ethics at its core is inherently Christian. Because the only way to make sense of morality is with a God who reveals himself to his creation in a consistent way. And then he calls us to live in such a way that is consistent with his revelation, with how he has revealed himself. So, morality can only be explained by the God of the Bible. And he brings that out in this definition. I think that's very important. Morality can be everyone, again, everyone is doing morality. Everyone's functioning with some form of morality. But we as Christians would say that the only way that morality makes sense is with the God of the Bible, who has revealed himself to us, created us, revealed himself, and has given us a morality. Ethics deals also with not just acts. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. But it also deals with the agents involved and their motivations. So that's important too, because there are two distinctions there that we'll touch on. On the one hand, you have just the act itself. Is this right or is this wrong? But then you also have those creatures called people that are actually going to be doing the act. So now you're not just dealing with the act itself, you're also dealing with the agent doing the act. And he brings that out too. It's a means of determining which persons, acts, and attitudes receive God's blessing and which do not. So you have multiple things involved in a moral decision. Now, by God's grace, God has designed us in such a way that we just live life. Not every moral decision we step back, whip out our ethics book, and look at our hierarchical chart and sit there. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. So we're obviously just living life, but in our study of Scripture, in our sanctification, in our Christian walk, in our Christian growth, we, by God's grace, are being equipped and learning so that when we go out and live and make moral decisions, we are doing it in light of what we have learned. So it's a multifaceted kind of definition. There's multiple things that are involved there. Ethics can also be distinguished between maybe.
Right, there you
Good. Distinguish between what's referred to as meta-ethics and normative ethics. Now, not to get overly complicated with it, but meta-ethics just means it's the big picture, the foundational discussion of just moral decision making. It's kind of more just like the philosophy of ethics, and it's what we're doing in this class. We're stepping back and we're just saying, we're not making decisions in this class per se. We're trying to wrestle through how we should make those decisions. And then the second one, normative ethics, this is the one that actually, you're taking this out into the real world, and now you're dealing with norms, specific norms that apply in every situation, in every moral decision that we are making. Whether, whatever area you want to talk about, whether it be abortion, whether it be homosexuality, whether it be, whatever area you want to talk about, now you're dealing with specific norms and you're applying them to those situations. So in this class, we're not necessarily going to do that. We're not necessarily looking at specific issues. I'm sure in our discussion, we'll bring things up, but we're trying, again, just step back, just kind of let's lay the foundation, let's chill and think through how we should think. That's really kind of what we're doing here, which is very, very important and healthy. And hopefully this encourages you then to keep learning, keep growing in this. The next thing is morality, specific set of norms or rules by which people should live. That's from Feinberg. So the only reason why I bring that up is because if you read certain ethic books, they make a distinction between ethics and morality. We're not going to get into that. They're really talking about the same thing. Whether so I'm using the words interchangeably. Whether I mention ethics, whether I mention morality, they're just kind of referring to the same thing. Those things which are right, those things which are wrong. So it's kind of interchangeably we're using that. Another one we can think through is good. So that which is valuable or beneficial or stands upon proper norms. So what is considered good? Well, it's those things which are consistent with the the ethical norms that we have established to be true. Another one, obligation. So a person's duty to perform moral acts. So my obligation in a moral decision is the thing which I ought to do. And that's gonna look different depending on which moral decisions you're making. And there's also a category which we'll touch on where it's not necessarily an obligation. It's not something I ought to do, but something I could do. So there's also that. Now, there's a lot of other definitions and words we can throw out there. But those I think are kind of the most important ones to just get us thinking in this topic. And also, I am emphasizing positive terms. Obviously, with every single one of these terms, there's a negative term, right? So that which is ethical, there's also unethical. That which is moral, there's immoral. That which is good, there's bad or evil. That which is where there's an obligation, while there's also something that I can do, but I'm not obligated to do. So I'm emphasizing more the positive terms in this discussion. Another important discussion in ethics and a category to think through is moral responsibility. So what am I responsible for? So ethics obviously is dealing with the issue of what is morally right, those decisions which are morally right, and those decisions which are morally wrong, which are inherently evil. And an important aspect of that is the whole concept of responsibility. Because I can only be held responsible for that which is morally wrong. That kind of goes hand in hand with the study of ethics. One category of this, one aspect of this category is freedom of action. So, does a person have to act freely in order to be morally guilty? So that's a very important discussion in ethics. Do I have to make it, does my decision have to be free in order for me to be held morally guilty? And there is, Feinberg writes in his book, there's universal agreement that no one is morally guilty for failing to do what he could not do or for doing what he could not fail to do. That's just a fancy way of saying that I cannot be held accountable for that which I did not freely do. So, the classic example, you have the bank teller, you have the robber, right? The robber comes into the bank, points a gun, says, "Give me the cash that's in your drawer or in the safe." Is the teller, if the teller decides to hand over the money, is he held morally accountable for that action? Is he morally guilty for that action? So ethics in general, and I think the Bible is consistent with this, we'll look at it, would say that no, you cannot be held morally liable if you did not act free. So I would say, generally speaking, that is a biblical understanding. There's a couple laws. There are a couple laws we can look at in Deuteronomy, but before we go there, in Hebrews chapter 2, I think the example of, Philippians. I think the example of Christ demonstrates this. So Philippians 2 is the famous passage of Christ's humiliation. The only reason, not the only reason I should say, the main reason that Christ's sacrifice was sufficient and accomplished its result is because Christ did it freely. He wasn't forced to do it. He voluntarily emptied himself, as Philippians says. He emptied himself, who existing in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. He wasn't forced to do this. And that is what makes the sacrifice of Christ powerful, is he voluntarily emptied himself and sacrificed himself for his people. In Deuteronomy, we also see this in the law. The kind of the classic example, maybe the more The more graphic example, this is seen in Deuteronomy chapter 22, starting with verse 23. You have this example of if there's a girl who is a virgin engaged to a man, and another man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them, and they will die. The girl, because she did not cry out in the city, and the man, because he has violated his neighbor's wife. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. But if in the field the man finds the girl who is engaged, and the man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lies with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the girl. There is no sin in the girl worthy of death. For just as a man rises against his neighbor and murders him, so is this case. When he found her in the field, the engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her. So you have these two situations that are presented there. In one situation, you have a free act that's carried out by both parties, and they are both held accountable for that and are guilty. On the other one, there was only one agent who was free, and that was the immoral act of the man in that situation, and it is only him who is held accountable in that situation. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 39 says, Moreover, your little ones, who you said would become plunder, and your sons, who this day have no knowledge of good or evil, shall enter there, and I will give it to them, and they shall possess it. There is also a biblical category of having knowledge of good and evil. So there is that category that is established in Scripture, and when you have that knowledge, you are held responsible. You are guilty for having that knowledge. When you do not have that knowledge, you cannot be held guilty for that. And, there's a lot of ramifications and implications of that. So I think that generally speaking, this concept of freedom of action is a biblical understanding in terms of moral decisions. I can only be held accountable for that which I freely do. Another term which we already touched on, obligation, and these three kind of actually go hand in hand. So on the one hand, you have morally obligatory. So these are actions which are in the category of ought. This is what I ought to do or ought not to do. So there are this is what morality is dealing with. Generally speaking, when you're dealing with moral issue, when you're saying this is a moral issue, a moral act, what you are saying is that I have to do this or I must not do this. This is an obligation. This is something that is morally obligatory upon me as a created human being. They are also universal commands that must be obeyed. These are universal commands for everyone, no matter where you are at in life, no matter where you're at in the world. The second category is morally permissible. So these are not in the category of ought. This is not a matter of what I ought to do. This is in the category of what I could do, what I might do. In the category, usually how we normally refer to it as this is in the category of liberty, Christian liberty. Morality usually is not dealing with issues of Christian liberty. Christian liberty is not moral issues, usually speaking. Obviously, they work together, and Christian liberty is dealing with issues that are moral inherently, but they're not moral in the sense of they are obligatory for every single human being or every single Christian. So Christian liberty issues are issues that are morally permissible. And Grudem actually brings this out, kind of interesting in his definition of ethics. And he actually writes that he changed how he defines ethics from his systematic theology book to his writing of his ethics books. But so he writes, I defined Christian ethics with different wording. Christian ethics is any study that answers the question, what does God require us to do, and what attitudes does he require us to have today with regard to any given situation? My new definition in this book shifts the emphasis from what God requires to what he approves. Because there are countless specific actions in life, such as enjoying a beautiful sunset or spontaneously singing a hymn of praise, that God does not actually require of us at that moment, but which he certainly approves. I also added personal character traits, sometimes called virtues. So it's kind of, I found his footnote there interesting, because there is this category of things that are morally permissible, but things that are not morally obligatory. They're not required. So kind of the big study of ethics will look at all of those. But normally when you're dealing with moral issues, that which is moral, you're really kind of in that category of an obligation, that which is obligatory. And then the last one is, ready for this great word, morally supererogatory. There we go, I got it. Supererogatory, so that's fancy. And pretty much what that means is a fancy way of saying going beyond duty, going above and beyond what I am supposed to do. And usually these are the categories of sacrifice. So normally the way this is understood in ethics is where I perform an action where I am not obligated to perform, and because my life is placed in danger of performing that action. So you know there's historical examples of this. There's I don't remember the year or the names, but there's that famous example of airplane crashes in the river, and one of the passengers is a really good swimmer. So he's able to swim to the shore, and then he actually swims and carries people across. He does it like 20 different times. I don't remember the details of it. And on the last time, he dies. So he wasn't able, he was too tired, he wasn't able to make it back. But he saved like 20 different people doing that. Now, he wasn't obligated to do that, but he chose to do that. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky from a Christian perspective, because there is a biblical category of sacrifice. We are called to live a life of sacrifice. So, and this is where ethics gets a little tricky and complicated, because this is where everyone's going to have to wrestle personally in every situation. Is this something I'm obligated to do? Because there is a level of sacrifice. If I'm able to do this, even though I'm putting my life in danger, should you do it? In light of what a life living for Christ, a life of sacrifice looks like. So some of these categories, again, they're generic ethic categories, and as we look at it as Christians, you're going to have to wrestle with some of them, and you're really going to have to think through, well, am I obligated to do this or not? Is this an area where I'm obligated to sacrifice or not? Because somebody who's purely looking at this from a secular perspective, they would say, well, no, you're not obligated, but if you chose to sacrifice yourself, great. We're gonna, we're gonna post you in the paper and do all kinds of things, which is good, obviously. But then as a Christian looking at it, there could be legitimate situations where we would say you are obligated to sacrifice yourself in that situation. So again, there's kind of a mixing of these categories in certain areas, specifically as Christians thinking through this from a biblical perspective, called to live a life of sacrifice, called to live a life that is consistent with our Lord and Savior. So that's moral responsibility. The next category that's important is the morality of the person. So we touched on this a little bit already. When we are dealing with, so this is dealing with the question, what makes a person moral in doing an act? So in a moral situation, in a moral decision, you have the act itself. Is it wrong for me to do this or not to do this? But you also have the person involved that is going to do that act. So what makes a person morally good, morally right in doing that act? So we're dealing with kind of these two aspects of this category. You have the action, and then you have the person. And and our definitions, I read Grudem's definition and John Frame's definition, they brought this out because from a Christian perspective, we would say that in moral decisions, you can never rule out motivation. You can never rule out my motivation, my virtue, who I am as a person, how I'm approaching this, my standing before the Lord, things like that. So we see this. You can go to Hosea in a couple of these passages. So you can go to Hosea chapter 6. In verse 6, God says, "For I delight in loving kindness rather than sacrifice, and in the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." So you have the situation of God is judging his people, not specifically for the act that they did, but he is judging them for their motivation. He is judging them for their heart, for their attitude, for their approach. Jesus also picks up on this in Matthew 23. You have this very interesting statement in Matthew 23. We can just start right from the beginning. "Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, 'The scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they tell you, do and keep, but do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them.'" Well, that's interesting, Jesus, because you say do it, but then you say don't do it. And I think the way to understand that is he is distinguishing between the proper acts of the law that they were teaching and their false traditions and their heart and their attitude, because he goes on for the rest of this chapter pretty much condemning them and judging them for their heart, their motivation, their attitude, and the false approach, the wrong approach that they had towards the things of the Lord. So I think that demonstrates the fact that when we think about moral decision making, it is not just the act itself that's important. It is also our motivation that's important. It is also our heart, our attitude that is important. And it is wrong to say that as long as good comes out of the action, then you acted morally. It's wrong to say that as Christians. As long as good came out of it, then we're good. We can go on that. We'll pick up a little bit of this because that gets us into the whole idea of consequences, which is a big discussion in this. So 3 categories under this. A person is considered to act morally when they acted freely, when they so you have the freedom of action, you have the morality of the action, and you have proper motivation. So when they freely did that action, when they did a morally good and right action, and when their motivation was right. Because there are times as Christians where we might do the right thing, but we still have to repent for our heart and our motivation in that right thing. Sure, we came to church. We did what we were supposed to do. We did the good thing. But man, we were jacked up inside, and we need to go and repent. Not necessarily for our coming to church, right? But we need to repent for our motivation and our heart in the midst of that. So again, this is kind of the two sides to morality, the act itself and then the person performing that act. Okay, so how do we approach ethics? Again, we're big picture. We're looking at this from a big picture perspective. How do we approach ethics? And I summarize this, again, getting it from different sources, but I summarize it with kind of three generic categories. One is you can have reason-based systems. So everything is about the mind and our ability to reason to morality. So this is what we see, I mentioned earlier, this is what we see in natural law ethics. This is also what we see in natural theology. This is something that was very famously promoted by Thomas Aquinas. Everything was about our reason, the mind. And a lot of it stemmed from wrong theology of understanding the sovereignty of God and the sinfulness of man. But this would be, reason-based systems would put a huge emphasis on the mind, logic, reason. Can we figure this out from our ability to reason through all of the wrongs and goods of a moral situation? I would place multiple systems in this. You can place relativism in this. Relativism is just the understanding that there isn't necessarily one absolute, one standard. Is kind of relative to, could be relative to you, could be relative to a society, could be relative in different aspects. I would place that under this idea of reason. Another one is antinomianism. I would also place it under this, where there really is no ethical system. It's just kind of everyone's doing whatever they think is right, whatever they reason to be right. So the mind plays a crucial role in this, and the mind is what is the source of ethics. Now, I would say as Christians, the mind does play a crucial role. Obviously, the mind, God created the mind. He made us reasonable human beings, and the Bible calls us to reason and to discern and to think. But the mind cannot be the source of our ethics. Our reason cannot be the source of our ethics. We have to go outside ourselves to get to the source of what is moral and what is immoral. The other category, the second one, is relation-based systems. So these are ethical approaches that focus on just social existences, interactions with others. What kind of impact will this act have upon society as a whole, my neighborhood, my people, my church, whatever, my family? So it's all about just the relationship. There's a couple systems that we can place in this. One is referred to as teleological. So that's kind of looking at that which is moral is that which brings about the best result. Best result could be best result for me, best result for the community, best result for society, best result for the greatest amount of people, whatever. There can be different, you can look at it from different aspects. Another one, I would also place utilitarianism in this. Utilitarianism is kind of a step from teleological, and pretty much utilitarianism would say that whatever is the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. Now, this one is very important because I would say that our modern world as a whole, starting with really the second half of the 20th century, this is the predominant approach to ethics. I watched ethics class from, you can get it for free on YouTube, I think it was from Harvard or something, and it was so hilarious because the whole entire class, the focus was never upon what is actually right and wrong. The focus was strictly on, let's just look at some situations, let's get everyone's opinion on the situation, and let's just, go back and forth on the situation. And you watch it, and you're just like, you want to rip your hair out. Because you're like, but I don't, like, and it was a large classroom of college students. I mean, must have been like over 100 students in there. And everyone just had different opinions. And the professor, really, he wasn't teaching. He was just, a moderator, just kind of throwing stuff out. And he was basing a lot of it on utilitarianism. And a lot of it is, and if you think through our society, this is really, I think, the approach that many people are functioning by. What is the greatest good for the greatest amount of people? That's it. That's where you're gonna base a lot of these things on. There's also situation ethics. This was promoted heavily by Joseph Fletcher in the 20th century. But his point was, what's the most loving act in a specific situation? So as we get into specific situations, what's the most loving thing to do? Now, I would say that we as Christians tend to fall into that too. I think in COVID, many Christians fell into that. Just what's the most loving thing to do for the people? So there's aspects of this where we are all guilty of to some degree or another. The last one I'll mention is virtue ethics. So the focus here is not on the morality of the action itself, but on the morality of the person. How good am I as a person? If I am a morally upstanding person, then society is just going to excuse my, what some of the things that I did because I'm just such an upstanding, citizen, an upstanding individual. So these are kind of relation-based systems. So I would say as Christians, there are aspects of some of these that we would say, yes, they are true, but none of this is the source of our ethics. None of this can be the source of where we go and where we get our morality. The last one I would say is what I think John Friedensburg calls this prescription-based system. So I would just say it's revelation ethics is kind of where I would put it. And this is where I think we as Christians need to be. So, and this is not only Christians would obviously hold to this. In ethics, largely speaking, it's referred to as divine command theory. So that which is divinely commanded, those acts which are divinely commanded to us. Another word you might hear is deontological, so which pretty much means it is necessary. Those things which are necessary for us to do. So, we as Christians, this is where we need to be. This is where we need to be when it comes to foundation of our ethics. Our ethics, our morality at its core is an ethics of revelation. We don't deny the mind, right? I mean, the mind plays a crucial role. I mean, I'm standing here thinking, you're sitting there thinking. We don't deny our situation. We don't deny consequences. We don't deny our society. We don't deny the things that might happen to us if we choose one act over the other. We don't deny those things, but we never make it the foundation or the source by which we choose what is right and what is wrong. Now, there's a lot of implications of that. So we don't ignore the other systems, and there are aspects of those systems that we would emphasize, but the goal of an action, the goal of every action is 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. Whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Now, it's a simple verse. We've probably all heard it many times. But that is so relevant to all kinds of aspects of life. And it is very relevant to this discussion of morality and this discussion of ethics. Our ethics, the foundation of our ethics, the source of our ethics, is based upon what God has declared, what God has revealed. And every moral decision that we decide in life should be decided based on that foundation. Is this glorifying to God? How do we know what is glorifying to God? We'll talk next time about the source of our ethics. Where do we draw that from? I'm sure you can probably guess where I'm going to go with it. Wayne Grudem's book, no, I'm just kidding. Obviously, the Bible is the source of our ethic. Now, sitting here, we might go, well, that's obvious. Duh, we're going to do what God commands. But in real life, where I think this becomes very challenging is especially in the whole discussion of consequences. And I'll end here. But what role do consequences play in our moral decision making? And there's two broad categories in this. There's most of the ethical systems that we talked about, they're going to fall under that category of consequentialism, where much of what is decided of what I do in life is based on the consequences of what that might mean. Well, this is going to cost too much money, so therefore I'm not going to do this. And especially in the medical world, I think in our modern time, that's very relevant. Versus, I would say, this is when years ago when I started to kind of more formally, I took a class in seminary on ethics, and actually John Feinberg was the professor there. This was the most challenging part for me, was thinking through this whole idea of consequences and what role do consequences play. Because where I was really challenged is many things in life that we do, we base it on consequences. And I was really challenged on that because I think that as Christians, when we are dealing with moral decisions in life, that should never be the starting point. That should never be the starting point. And I think Christians justify this very easily. They justify it very easily. And just the one vivid example that it just stuck with me, from years ago. But just in the medical world, we justify, the verse that's thrown around a lot is, well, for me to die is gain and to live is Christ. Therefore, it's just, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that procedure. I'm not going to do that. Is that a right starting point for us as Christians? Or is the right starting point not, well, this is going to cost too much money, this is going to, just all these different consequences? Or is the right starting point, what has God commanded? What commandments of God, what norms has God laid down? So my first and primary command in this situation is to not take innocent life, which the positive aspect of that law is to preserve life. So how does that apply to my specific sickness? Again, using the medical, and I just use that because it stuck with me from years, kind of thinking through this. And I think also because the medical world is getting more and more complicated as Christians, we're dealing with situations. For example, the one clear example is like a feeding tube. What is a feeding tube? Something that is contributing to life continuing, and is it right or wrong to pull that? That's a very real ethical question that we have to wrestle with. When is an individual considered to not be alive, or when are we obligated to preserve a life? And I think a lot of Christians are quick to jump. For me to die is gain. For me to live is Christ and die is gain. And I don't think that's the healthiest approach in life as we think about moral decision making. Now, I'm making broad, generic statements. Every situation needs to be examined at its own, context and its own situation. But I think where this is most challenging is just, again, do we make our decisions based upon the norms and the standards that God has laid down, and then we look at other things and how they might relate, hence consequences, or do we start with consequences? Well, this procedure is going to cost too much, therefore I'm not going to do it. So I think that the whole idea of consequences is something that I know for me was very challenging to think through, because I think a lot of Christians, and in my interaction throughout the years with Christians, I think a lot of Christians are just quick to jump to consequences and they spiritualize it, because it's so easy to spiritualize it. But I don't think we're called to do that. I really don't. I think we are called in our ethics, in our morality, to approach moral decision making from the perspective of what has God said, what has God revealed. In light of that, what am I supposed to do? And there's obviously, a lot of implications of that. So we'll pick up next time on this slide, which is the nature of ethical norms. You'll see a little bit of where we're going to go with that, but we'll pick up on that and then get into source, because the nature of ethical norms is very important too, on how do these norms relate to each other? How do morals relate to each other, and do morals ever contradict? So is there ever going to be a time when God's commandments are going to be contradicted in a specific situation in our life? So we'll pick up on that, because that's a very neat discussion too, that I think has very good and practical implications. Questions, comments? Matt, make sure you turn on ambient. Cool. Yes.
So if we cannot be morally responsible if we are not free, then how can you hold that in conjunction with the doctrine of original sin?
Explain more in terms of.
Are people free to choose to do good before Christ has regenerated them?
So, well, I think there's a distinction between everyday ethic, which is I am good from the perspective of what God has declared good. So, for example, to not murder somebody. That is a good ethic for every single individual to do, whether you're a believer or you're not a believer. Original sin is dealing more with our standing before God, and am I free to choose to be with God? But original sin would not teach that you're not free to choose something that is morally good in light of what God has commanded in everyday life. So obviously on the big theological picture, to believe in Christ is a good act. But that is an act, that's not a moral act in terms of my actions, in terms of my relationship in this world. Ethics is dealing with how morality functioning in this world. Does that help or no?
I'm not sure. I need to think about it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Ethics, there's a lot of things in ethics that, there were many times I was walking away from my class years ago and I was like, yeah, I got to chew on that one. It's a really huge topic, but it's so important to just everyday life, because we're always making decisions, but a lot of times we don't stop and think how we're making those decisions and why we're making those decisions. Andrew?
Yeah, I was just thinking that when you were first starting out, I mean, you talk about the normative ethics, which I guess I would kind of, when I had studied this before, ethics in a class before, ethics was kind of defined as the kind of ranking values in terms of what is important,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose, overall in a big meta picture. And then morality is that, or what I think that's the meta ethics kind of thing, and then the normative ethics is what we can call morality. So it was had a little bit of distinction, and then there was like a sub-tier down, very insignificant kind of things, which would be considered mores, which are non-moral, according, say, to the Bible, but more of an expectation within a society of what is good, versus bad. But so anyway, there's norms that God has established, but if we don't, so you take things like situational ethics that are saying like, it's the most loving act, whatever the most loving act, okay, keyword there being loving, set that aside in the bucket. Greatest good, utilitarian, the greatest good for the greatest number, keyword there being good, set that in the bucket, okay, and then the best result, the teleological relation-based system. Take the word best. We have loving, good, and best. Okay, so here's Greg Bonson's question. By what standard? So there's a standard. There has to be a standard of morality given, which we get to your, prescription-based system, your revelational thing. If you don't have that, I would say that it is essentially a non-normative-based system. Otherwise, because then the norm just shifts around, right?
Yeah, it's relative.
We get to, like, whatever is right for me, whatever I think is the most loving thing. I get to define love by my standards of love, but that guy doesn't just define love like I define love. I think love is letting pedophiles, access to children.
Yeah.
That guy doesn't think so, Who's to
Yeah.
say? So the norms is very, very significant, and then I think that's what actually defines the morality, of the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Something might help to your question that I just thought of too was, in ethics you have a horizontal approach, which is my relationship to other human beings, and then you have kind of the vertical approach, which is my relationship to God. So obviously an unbeliever when he does something that is morally right, in light of what God has revealed, that plays a huge impact on the horizontal level. He doesn't murder somebody. Well, that's good. I don't want to be murdered. But in terms of vertically speaking, his relationship with God, nothing changes. There's nothing there. Because from a vertical relationship, what he needs to do is to understand why he's not murdering somebody, which would ultimately, the law bringing him to Christ. So maybe that will help a little bit too.
Coming in on that, with the freedom of action, you can say like the bank teller, the guy comes in, puts a gun in his face, says, empty the vault, put it in a bag and hand it over. He's obviously under coercion, and I don't think anybody would really fault him for just forking over the money. But he could say in the moment, no, I'm not gonna go with this because it's an evil act, and I'm not gonna hand over the money because this is other people's hard-earned money that's, at the bank here.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to essentially, and he lays down his life. Okay, so here's the value distinction here. It's like, what's more valuable? Is it the value of the cash, or is the value of his human life or other people endangering other human lives or whatever? And so we put the value on his human life is more valuable than cash, which is replaceable. People are more important than things. We can say this to our kids.
Yeah.
So that he's free to be super derogatory in his duty as a bank teller or not, and we might think him a fool for his decision to do such. Or we might just say any normal person would do this, he shouldn't be held responsible for court of law as a novelist or something like that, right?
Yep.
So see, there's a freedom to act. It's like the person, people justify themselves for when they walk up to Planned Parenthood, and nobody's walking her in there by the elbow, but she's walking in. And I was stressed. I have these things, and if I don't have this baby now, I can do greater good for the world and justify this and such. But in the meantime, you committed murder because you went ahead with that. So it's super applicable, like really, really interesting discussion.
actually is a very interesting discussion in that, because there are some secular ethicists that are making the argument that for a mother to carry a baby to, what's the word, to term, or, but that is actually an act of supererogation, because it is something going above and beyond the duty. So it's just, yeah, when you enter into secular ethics, there's just an insanity amount of
But there are cases when you take it to the extreme, everybody goes to the Nazis, but it just worked so well. The Nazis did tons of medical research in the concentration camps. They learned a lot of things that could help a lot of people in their health. In their studies, they studied the brain. They did it by cutting out chunks of the Jew's brain and seeing which things fell apart. But they learned things, but because if it's just for the greater good, then it's okay to do that to people. It's okay to sew the wrong leg on a person and you chopped off their perfectly healthy leg, because you're going to help all these other people later on by applying that knowledge that you've gained. So it's a scary thing if you push these youths to the end of where does this get you? It gets you to doing things like that.
Well, and the challenging part with that situation, and this is can we use that knowledge?
Yeah,
you know, and that's a big ethical discussion. Yeah, can we use that knowledge in our, knowing that where it came from? And that's a big discussion too with vaccines, and aborted fetuses. That whole discussion, so which we're not getting into because there's disagreements there. But yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of implications of that, of this perspective. Okay, we'll end it there. Thank you guys for coming out. Let me pray quick, and then we'll go downstairs and get some food.